Welcome to the JMark Business Innovation Technology Experience.
In this episode, we talk about preparing for the worst, the essential things to know about backup and disaster recovery. A few key takeaways are continuity. So the entire purpose of backup and disaster recovery is to be able to continue working and serving your clients. Next is don't be intimidated. Just set aside a few days with your team and just start. And then next is ask the famous questions. Who, what, when, where, why, how, and also what if? And then last, just remember, anywhere you start is further ahead than you are now. Okay, here we go.
Okay, welcome everybody to the JMark Business Innovation Technology Experience. And today we have a couple folks from JMark here to talk about something that I would call extremely important and vital for preparation and planning for the coming year. And to give some context to this, back in, I don't even remember the year, but back 4 or 5 years ago, one night I got a call from our CEO, Thomas Douglas. And Tom had sent a picture of the office, and I saw a river basically flowing in front of the office. And he told me that things are getting pretty bad. And my question to him was, do we need to activate the backup disaster recovery plan? And he said, yes. And that small little action put in place a mountain of work that everybody pretty much knew what to do, because we had prepared, we had created a backup disaster recovery plan. We knew the processes, we knew who to contact and what to do, and it prepared us for the future. And coming into 2020, the pandemic hit, and we saw businesses shutting down, sending their employees home. JMark made a plan with their employees. This is what's going to happen, and the plan got pushed forward about a week, and it was everybody go home, and nothing changed. The first day of the lockdown in Missouri, we had over 300 work from home tickets from our clients and didn't miss a beat and continued to operate. And I don't say any of these things to brag, but I say them because we live in a time that you have to expect the unexpected. We don't know what 2021 is going to bring. We don't know what changes will happen in the economy, and we have to be ready. And so we have James Schmidt and Mark Niederwimmer here, and they are going to talk to us a little bit about creating a backup disaster recovery plan. So James and Mark, to start off here, what are some of the things you see that people don't, quite understand regarding a backup disaster recovery plan? Why I see so many companies that just don't start because I don't know, it's so difficult, or maybe they just don't know how to do it. What are people missing? What are the important things to keep in mind when you're creating this?
Mark, do you want to start, or you want me to start?
Sure, I'll go. The first thing you have to have is your data somewhere safe that's not in the building you're in. So you need a good offsite backup strategy and a plan to deploy it and how people can access it, which JMark's example, as a remote worker anyway, whenever they had to shift resources from our Springfield office to our underground location, we didn't miss a beat. So having data away from your primary location is very important. And then the plan that outlines how to get to it, the steps you have to take to access that data.
Yeah, I'd say there's also a fine line of these being too simplified or too overcomplicated. A lot of the ones that I see from clients that come on, I said, hey, send me your DR process or your BCP or what's called business continuity plan. And it truly is like 3 lines of, call Tom Douglas and everything will be good. And you're like, oh, we need some more planning in this. And so, what goes into planning and understanding, Mark started that off, is where is your data that you're going to need to recover from, and start with that. I always start end in mind. What happens if, we live in the Midwest, a tornado blows that office building down? And then how do I start from there? Who do I need to first call for first line of defense, and start the ball rolling? But don't overcomplicate it. Don't simplify it so much where it's a three-liner.
I think it would probably help if I explained a little bit about how we started with our planning. And because it is a big project, it's not something to just dabble at. And so what we did is we got all of the individuals that needed to be a part of the planning, and we put them in a room, and we sat there for 3 days, and that's all we did was we worked on our back disaster recovery plan. We designed how we wanted it to look like. We designed what the different sections were. There are times we had breakouts and people would gather certain information, and we got as much as we got done, much as we could get done. And then that was the point of ending. And the other part, like before all that, is there has to be kind of some direction in the organization in terms of a back disaster recovery plan. So when we became SOC compliant, that was part of our direction. We had this control that was hovering over us saying, you have to have a back disaster recovery plan. So we put in a policy that is a short little thing, like you mentioned, James, but it is a policy basically stating you will update, or JMark will update the back disaster recovery plan every year. And so now it's up to us as leaders in the organization to make sure we're following that rule, so to speak, that control, and getting together. And so every year, once a year, we get together for 3 days, and we essentially start planning. We plan what we can do. We get as much done as we can. And this has resulted in, again, not to say this to brag, but because of the complexity of our business and how thorough our planning is, we're now looking at a 300+ page back disaster recovery plan, because we've walked through these scenarios and we've walked through all these different changes and things that need to happen. So it's something that you have to bite off, but don't do it in a way that is, you do this, you do this, you do this. Get everybody together in a room and just start it. That's the best way to get going.
Yeah, and I'll add, a lot of times, as you talked of we're talking about backup disaster recovery plan, we always think that's only related to backups, and thinking of that end in mind. Look at the building that you're in. I've seen we had a client that we did a DR test and found out that the generator needed maintenance because it hadn't had maintenance for a little bit, and it's putting that into your DR plan to make sure, hey, you have a great generator here on site. Has that been maintenance, to make sure when that happens that you can rely on those resources through that process? So it's thinking outside of just the backup ecosystem that we always think, oh, we need to have encrypted backups. We need to have it offsite. That's one part of your overall backup disaster recovery that we need to think of. And what are the frameworks that we can rely on? We have a great benefit of going through the SOC process and having that framework. If you are a financial institution, you're a governmental institution, what are the frameworks that you need to rely on that give you those steps to walk you through those scenarios to think through the process? I think we all have industry standards that we could rely on to help us build that process so it doesn't feel so overwhelming. Because I think we can all agree, spending 3 days in a room to go through this gigantic plan, that sounds overwhelming. How do you break it down so it's not? You're following a framework depending on your industry to think through that process.
I think, in thinking about our plan and some of the different things we've done, when you're thinking about creating this plan, think about the how and the what and the why. And so, for example, when a disaster strikes of any sort, it could be a security incident, it could be a natural disaster. first thing is people need to be informed. Okay, so what does that look like? Who needs to be informed? And so you document, who are these different groups that need to be informed? Who is allowed to talk to the media? Who will be communicating to employees? What messages will be communicating to employees? What is the controls around communication to the employees? For example, we have in our backup disaster recovery plan a contact list of both personal and work information for individuals that need to be contacted in the case of an emergency. And then we go into how each of the employees will be contacted through basically a phone tree through supervisors. And then you just keep breaking this down, and like, what if this happens, and what if this happens? And the unfortunate thing about 2020 is that very few organizations did a what if on a pandemic, because it seemed like it was just like, somewhere else. But now's the time where we gotta look at these things, and especially when it comes to security, and go what if, and then you just walk down, that what if, who needs to be contacted, what actions need to be taken, and you just document.
I think out of the pandemic, there's a lot of companies that kind of have a little bit of a start on a business continuity disaster recovery plan, because they've had to remotely deploy their employees, which would simulate they can't go to the office. If a tornado levels a building, they can't go to office, they got to work from home. So they've got a little bit of a jump start in it, and a little bit of understanding of what it'll take to plan for something like that, to where you can then start adding details of if your data is still at your building, what happens if it is gone? Where can you put it? Where will it be to where the employees can access it remotely?
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, Mark, that now is the perfect time to start, because just the state of the world forced everybody to get a head start. And now take what you've already learned and, as Todd is saying, carry it to the next step. And I think in situations like this, you find pretty quickly that it seems overwhelming, but once you sit down and start, it usually becomes less overwhelming, because you start to see that different people already know all the answers, and all you're doing is like gathering, oh, this person knows this piece of the puzzle, this person knows this piece of the puzzle. We're putting everybody's understanding and everybody's expertise on paper in one place, and that's what a plan is.
Yeah, as you both were talking, it reminded me about the plan, in the sense of, when you're creating this plan, what naturally happens is you start to realize certain things maybe you're not doing right, or certain things you need to change, whether that's a communication or different kind of software, or retiring some different systems. Or for example, in JMark's instance, when the flood occurred, we quickly discovered that everybody who had a workstation, a desktop computer that sat on the floor, was damaged because of the water. And so now it's just laptops, and that's kind of the same thing with COVID. People have had to migrate to home, and companies that just had workstations for their employees had a harder time making that happen. And so you look at it, and you can't get bogged down in the, oh, we got to do this now. Oh, we got to do this now. Oh, we got to do this now. The backup disaster recovery plan is going to naturally birth different initiatives and different things that have to happen. They don't necessarily have to happen, during those 3 days. But the importance of being prepared is just to start. And it's better to have certain things done in the plan and certain things documented than to have nothing. And as you go through this step by step, you'll start realizing different things that need to change, and it'll help to optimize your business, to be honest.
Yeah, as you guys were talking through a plan, I always like to throw out some resources out there of different things like this. And in the security world, we follow a lot of frameworks. The two that come to mind from how do you get started with a plan is NIST. So that's a national standard of security, and then also CIS, it's Center for Internet Security. And those all have frameworks where you could look at that and allow you to develop a BCP or a plan, a disaster recovery plan, right from their frameworks. But I'll throw even one more out that I was able to pull up from the National Association of Community Health Centers around healthcare. And they easily outline free resources of you want to do your business continuity team, your hazard vulnerability analysis, your business impact analysis, and then your mitigation strategy, your recovery strategy, your plan and maintenance and sustainability. Those are easy resources right on that you can search through for your different industry to give you that framework and template of, hey, how do you break this down a little easier to make that plan? So those are easy to gather.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. I mean, when we started our planning, I went into the meeting with a framework that I put together based on all these different things. I was looking at all these different frameworks and examples from different areas and pulled the different items that were important for JMark. And as we went through the planning, we realized some of the things didn't need to be there. And we realized there were things that needed to be on there that weren't on there. And so looking at the examples and just starting is really key. The other thing too that I was thinking about that it really helps you realize is when you're talking about a disaster, you begin to realize how long that disaster can actually last for your business without things getting seriously problematic. And so you start thinking in terms of how long can this application be down? How long can we not have access to this kind of data? How long can we not have communication and different things working? And so I think that would be a good thing to talk about, Mark or James, if you want to talk about the recovery time and things like that. I think that would be beneficial to our listeners.
Sure. The recovery point and recovery time objectives, those are things that have to be set by the business. How much data can you lose dictates how frequently you need to back your system up. How quickly you need to recover your data will dictate what kind of platforms you have in place to recover it. So those are all very critical on how long can the business be down without any work being done before it's in trouble. So there's a lot of metrics to go through to try to pull those numbers together. And based on what you find, you may find that 2 or 3 days you're in trouble, or a week, but that's where you just have to sit down as a company and discuss it and look at all your applications and how many employees you have and where they would go. And the disaster dictates a lot of that too. I'm more from plan for the worst, so what happens if tonight a tornado goes through and tomorrow morning your building's not even there? What do you do? And just start thinking about that a little bit. It'll give you an idea of how complicated it can be, how much you have to think about, and kind of gets the ball rolling on starting to put a plan together to try to figure out what you would do, what you can do, and just start developing it from there.
And Mark, can you go back real quick? Can you kind of help and define for anybody listening what RTO specifically is and what RPO is specifically? And then I'll have some real world thoughts on these.
Sure. Recovery point objective, that's how much data can you lose? We back up once a day. A tornado levels the building in the afternoon, you're going to lose a day's worth of data at least. Recovery time objective, that's how quick do I got to be back up? I need to be back up in 2 days. So what's your plan? And plans could get complicated and it depends on platforms that you run too. Is most of your information internet based that you can access it through the web, or are they servers running at your location? So some applications you may be able to be up the next day with internet access because that's where your data is stored, versus you have to order hardware and restore from backup. That can take days to weeks depending on how much you've lost in the disaster.
Perfect. And it doesn't always have to be a tornado. I know we talk about tornado a lot. We're in the Midwest, but it's simple, even a database corruption. It happens. You deal with some of these line of business apps that have 3-4 databases that are tied together. And what happens when one gets corrupt? Does that take down the other 3? And you always have to understand, as Mark said, how far back of the data that you could potentially lose of that RPO, and then how quickly do you need to be up. But I want to throw something out here that when we're doing these planning sessions or when we're discussing these topics, I think most clients say, I want to be back up as soon as possible. Absolutely. I think that's always our objective. But I also want to bring in the thought about costs. We've sat across the table a few times where, hey, I want to be up in 1 hour. Absolutely, we could do this. It's going to be this amount. They're like, whoa, what does 10 hours look like? Because when you're building these redundant systems around disaster recovery, you have to understand, as even Mark pointed out, do you have to order new servers because the server room got flooded in the disaster? Do you have to order new hardware? Can you spin up in a cloud instance within your disaster recovery plan that you are able to be up there and it doesn't cost you as much? So always be realistic with the time that you need to be up, because you may say, hey, it's going to cost my business $10,000 an hour to be down. Perfect. Let's build something that's resilient, that doesn't cost too much on a monthly basis, but hits those recovery points. But if you say I need to be up in 30 seconds, absolutely, that can be built. Here's what the cost is going to look like to make sure we're realistic in those timeframes of RTO and RPO.
I think that's great insight. And it really, as you talk through these things, you really start realizing that there are certain things you absolutely have to have, and there are certain things you don't have to have. And when we did our plan, we had some of our numbers were way too low. And going through a disaster, we realized, we really don't need this system. There's ways we can operate without it. And what you think is critical sometimes isn't as critical as you think. But one of the things that both of you said that I think is important is, a lot of people think about a disaster and backup recovery planning as the worst thing possible that could happen. You're planning for the worst thing possible that could happen. But there are so many different scenarios. I mean, somebody clicks on a link in an email and suddenly all the computers in the office are encrypted and you have no access to data. As James said, a database corruption occurs with your line of business application. Having a vendor, we've seen cloud providers go out of business and give little to no notice. We've seen IT people that have passed away suddenly, or internal IT people that have passed away suddenly, or so nobody has access to certain data if something goes down because nobody kept the passwords anywhere. And there's so many different scenarios. And the thing that amazes me about the current time we are in is that every day it's like, oh wow, a volcano's going off. Oh wow, this happened, and a volcano went off yesterday. And all these things are happening, and and we don't say that to scare people. We say that to, let's get prepared. What can we do to help you be prepared, or what can get everybody together and just start slowly picking away at this, because we have to expect the unexpected now.
Todd, you hit on something. This whole conversation, we've talked about whether it's hardware or who to call, but I think you hit on something, because it's a reality. IT people have passed away, and they had the keys of the castle, and like, oh crap, I don't have any of the passwords. It's what is your understanding of redundancy of human capital as well? I'll tell you in JMark, it's we have systems that we put all those passwords in. We have the documentation, so we have redundancy. It doesn't take away the value that team member provides in the organization to our clients. It allows us to be very fluid and actionable when something happens. I'm not relying on James to make sure, if if I'm relying only on James, we're screwed. I want to be able to have redundancy of James within these processes, so that absolutely anything happens, we're ready to go. We're solid. So it's understanding that human capital that we need to duplicate some of that understanding within our documentation, our password structure, or just understanding of that workflow or line of business app.
That actually reminds me of something else. Having more than one of James, from the standpoint of when a disaster strikes of any kind, there tends to be a lot of cooks in the kitchen, because everybody wants to help. Everybody wants to help the company. Everyone wants to help each other. And that's one of the reasons why backwards disaster recovery is so important also, is just to make sure there is order in the chaos, that we understand who is responsible for what and what we're supposed to be doing. Because otherwise you have all of these cooks in the kitchen that are giving orders in different directions and sending people off, and it's all just chaotic and makes things worse. The idea of continuity in a disaster is that there is order. You have the processes, you have the procedures. If you look at the military, I mean, they are the greatest example of preparation. They think up the craziest, weirdest scenarios, and then they practice. And that's another part of backwards disaster recovery that we haven't even gone into, is the idea of practicing your backwards disaster recovery planning. Flip a switch and cut off all your data real quick, and how do you recover from that? And those are the kind of things we do actually on an annual basis.
Yeah, I think one word that James used that I think I'd like to highlight, just so people think about it, is documentation. That's part of what this process is documenting these things that like you're saying, Todd. If anybody stops and thinks, they probably know, oh, something happened. Here's who needs to be called first. Here's who needs to be called second. But as soon as that happens, the plans, like, no matter how clear it is in your head when everything's calm, it starts getting hazy, and then you start kind of, because your adrenaline's going, you're trying to figure out. And if you've got that documented, you know exactly who to call. Everybody knows what their role is, what needs to be done in what order, and it simplifies things, and it actually gets things done more quickly. And I can even give a story that is something very simple, and I don't even know if you'd categorize it as a disaster, but it was certainly a trouble at a place I worked before. There were only 3 of us. There was the business owner and me and another worker, and we were at the startup point where we literally were working in a garage, and the owner had gone hunting. He was up in, far away up in the mountains. There was a power outage and everything shut down, and we did lose some things, and the 2 of us that were there working, we didn't even know who to call. We couldn't get a hold of the owner, because he was up in the mountains, and we didn't know the name or number of our IT provider. We didn't have the first thing, and we lost 3 days worth of work. Whatever, I don't even remember exactly what came after that, once that we finally got a hold of the IT provider and they started restoring our systems. But we simply lost 3 days of work because we couldn't get any work done, because we couldn't get a hold of anybody to start the restoration process. And that could have been solved simply by what James is talking about, by documenting something as simple of having, here's who to call, here are the phone numbers written down.
Yeah. Can we let's flip this and hit off something that Todd said is testing. Can we talk a little bit about testing this plan? Because it looks great on paper until you get hit in the face and you're like, oh, yeah, this doesn't work. So I think that's from a quote from boxing. It's all good until you get hit in the face in the ring, and then it's like, okay, now I need to be prepared. So let's talk about being prepared when you're testing. When we test, a lot of times it's not always what is a success when we're testing? A success could be that we found that whatever we plan doesn't work, and we have to retool our plan as well. And a lot of times I've seen customers say, well, this failed. No, it actually succeeded because we found the weakness. And that's why we test on an annual basis. That's why annual testing is so important. And having different scenarios is even keying off what Dax said is, what does it mean to just hit the power breaker in the office that they're at and turn it back on and see what happens? Because then you're going to see, are your UPSs working properly? Are the batteries, because they could have all green lights. Oh, the batteries are bad in those UPSs, and we need to replace those UPSs because of that. So it's always understanding, testing it, and then see what fails, because then we get to retool and continually improve that business continuity plan to make sure when something does happen, yep, we're prepared because we've done these processes of testing and redevelopment. Testing is huge. If you don't have testing, you're missing half of it.
Yeah, and it doesn't have to be complicated. It doesn't have to be, all of the testing doesn't have to be IT related. I mean, you can start off with tabletop exercises. In a tabletop exercise, you think up a scenario, you bring it to the table, and you walk through, the actual individuals that are responsible for certain things. Okay, I'm going to do this. Okay, I'm going to do this. I'm going to do this. And you start realizing things. I mean, I was working with our director of security, Eric, on a tabletop exercise scenario, and we were documenting this to figure out how we were going to document them moving forward. And it's important to have people there, because I was mentioning things like, well, what about this? He's like, oh yeah, I didn't think of that. You can't just rely on one person to have all the answers, even if they are an expert. You got to get multiple people and run through these scenarios, and you always will find something that could be done smoother, something that could be done better, and it just helps you make your plan better, as James said.
Mark, would you add anything else to what you've seen in the testing realm? I know you're especially more around the backup side instead of the overall BCP. What have you seen that would help in understanding testing processes?
I think you had a lot of good points with UPSs, because a lot of times people don't know that a UPS batteries don't work until you try them out. But to test things like that is important, because you're going to discover weaknesses and strengths while you're doing it. You don't want to be crazy with it, like, you don't crash your car to test your airbags. You don't want to go quite that far. Don't pour water on your server to see if you can recover from it. But you can do things of shut down an application server and see how that impacts the business, because that's another thing that comes out of discussions and talking about it is you'll make a list of, here's the 10 applications we use, and you've got to prioritize them. If a disaster happens, what's the first thing you need to have? Banks will tell you they got to have their core up so they can find out, they can do account lookups and things like that. They have to have money that they can give people. So you will need to put an order on what needs to be up first, what's highest priority, what's lowest priority, and that can help dictate how quick you can recover and find strengths and weaknesses that you have in the plan.
The other thing that we've kind of talked about this already, but just the idea of how it changes certain things in the organization. So we've walked through some of these scenarios, and someone mentions, oh, well, that's going to make our doors not work, or that's going to disable all the fingerprint readers, or that's going to do that. And so now we have a whole new issue that we have to solve, which is much better to solve beforehand than it is to solve during a disaster. And you just discover and you make those process changes and you move on. So it's just so important to get the right people in the room and work through all of these things. I was one thing I've always thought about backup disaster recovery plans, at least ours at JMark, is this is going to sound really strange, but there is a movie with Matthew Broderick, Godzilla, many years ago. And in that movie, Bruce Willis was in it, if I'm not mistaken. He was like a military person. And there were these conversations between the civil leaders and the military leaders. And Bruce Willis, as the military leader, was saying, you do not want the military to come in and take control of the city, because it was this big, this big industrial, it was very orderly, and it would take over everything. And that's kind of how I see backup and disaster recovery plans, not in a bad way, but when it is well planned and done right, that's exactly what happens. It's like this boom, boom, boom. It's just this mountain of people that know what they're doing. They know where to go. They know what to look at. They know who to contact. That's a good backup and disaster recovery plan. When you have unknowns, that's not a good backup and disaster recovery plan. And I just thought that's a kind of an interesting scenario, because that's ultimately what we're looking for when we're creating these things, is to get people moving.
I didn't know Bruce Willis was in a Godzilla movie. I'm gonna have to find that now.
Something new every day.
Yeah, it's at the end of the day, how much control do you want, and how much unknowns do you want to discover as you're going through this? Because you don't want to discover the unknowns when you're going and you're into the bad stuff. So totally understand.
Yeah, I think that's the key there, is that it's, as soon as you start talking about these, I'm certain that there are people that are going to be listening right now and getting a little bit stressed. They're like, this sounds stressful to sit down and be trying to plan this out and have somebody say, oh, what if that, makes it so the key readers don't work, or card readers, and these kind of this fear that the scenarios are going to keep getting bigger and bigger. But the simple fact is, those scenarios they can either happen in a controlled environment, in a conference room when you're planning it and you're mapping this out, or they can happen when the chaos is going on and you don't have an office and you're trying to do all of this, working from an offsite place and piece things back together. And it's much better to have it in the controlled environment. And don't be afraid of the unknowns. Again, going back to what Todd said at the very beginning, get everybody in a room and just start. There are going to be these unknowns, but that's a good thing, because everything all these unknowns that get brought up is something that you are going to be able to find an answer for, and start getting clarity, and that will start coming clearer and clearer and clearer. And those unknowns, yes, they're going to arise, but you're also going to be able to resolve them.
Yeah, I could even say business can be stressful, especially in the day and age we live in right now. It's who are you? Well, I was trying to be more positive, Todd. It is. It is there's so many components to each of these. This isn't just a plug about JMark. It's who are you having within your corner to help you in all of these? Obviously, if you're a business owner, you're not going to do your own books. You're going to reach out to a good accounting firm. You're going to look at your IT and you're going to find that right provider that fits your organization or internally. And it take the stress off of you as a business leader, and find those right people that you can surround yourself with, to know they already have a framework and that can help you in this process. Because if you look at, you have as Todd said, a 300-page disaster recovery process. Holy crap, that's overwhelming. I think that everybody can say that, is find the people that have that in their wheelhouse, have the framework, and can walk you through it to help you through that stressful process.
You're gonna set me off now, James. The on that topic, one thing that comes to mind is, we've talked about vetting your partners and vetting who's on your bench. When you're in the middle of a disaster, that's even more important. The vendors that you use, having good relationships with the software companies of the software that you use, and people that understand your systems. And one thing that drives me crazy is I see all of these IT companies that say they do backup and disaster recovery planning, but they've never been through a disaster. They don't have a plan, or a plan that is actually, worthy of clouding it. And so, I don't want to just say be careful, but yeah, be careful, because when you're in a disaster, you want the strongest person next to you that can help you, and whatever that is. And so that's why we share resources to help organizations to vet IT companies, and why we share organizations to help, or information just to help improve your IT and your strategy. And so just keep that in mind. It's not every company is the same, and it's important to have the right people around you.
Mark.
James, you before we were talking, you mentioned a couple things that you were thinking about. Do you want to throw those out around the three areas that everybody should have in their plan?
Oh, okay. I'm like, wait, what were we thinking about? When you go down this line, one, I think a lot of these processes should have been done already. When you get to this point, Todd puts a perfect example is your vendor management of choosing the right vendor, because that starts it off right. Then as you get into the technicalities, what I mentioned earlier when I was looking at that National Association of Community Health Centers and their process to develop what's called a BCP, or business continuity plan, there's components in there to start off with. So the first component is a BIA, business impact analysis. And it says, what are your critical systems and what are your non-critical systems? And even Mark hit on this earlier around, hey, walk through your plan. What needs to be up first? So your business critical is maybe your scan reader when you get in the office, just in the office. Maybe it's not critical, but your line of business app for a bank is super critical to make sure you can give money back to your depositors and do that. So it's going through critical versus non-critical. Then that allows you to layer in your DR, your disaster recovery, to say, okay, we know that the critical systems need to be on certain storage or be able to go to our cloud instance within an hour to be up and running. Or maybe, the critical, even though it's critical, we can be down for a day and rebuild the server and it'd be okay, or non-critical. And then those two wrap around to the overall BCP, or business continuity plan, that really encompasses not only the IT section, but the rest of your organization. I mentioned earlier accounting or human resources. What are systems to be able to have a call function? So you have a vendor maybe that has, I think we use a text message function. So if something happens, you can hit go and it texts all the right people within that disaster recovery. And so you're encompassing that BCP throughout all your processes and taking in the BIA and DR. So I know there's always acronyms within every industry. That's just some of them within IT, but that is synonymous with business as a whole.
Well, I think that this topic is hard to sum up in a half an hour or so, and it's something that we could talk about for days. But we encourage everybody as they're preparing for 2021 to prepare for whatever is ahead. Get your things in order, and let J-Mark know if you have any questions. Dax, what did you write down as some of the takeaways that people should remember?
Yeah, I've got a few. So the first is probably the key word. We've been talking a lot about backup and disaster recovery, but I think that the key word to focus on is continuity. That the entire purpose of all of this is so that you can continue working, continue providing your services, and continue serving your clients and customers in the midst of whatever upheaval is going on of whatever size. So that's the purpose of doing all of this, is so that you can achieve continuity. The second is, don't be intimidated. Just set aside 3 days, get everyone in a room, and just start. And the clarity will start to iron itself out as you go through this process, if you have the right people in that room. And then once you've done that, then make a policy, make a rule that every year you will update your plan. And a year later, set aside 3 more days and go from there. And you take it and you update it to the best of your ability at each time. And little by little, you will have a really good plan that works for you and that grows with your business. The next is to start with your data. Figure out, how you're going to have an offsite backup for your data. Get that set up with your IT provider and your plan so that people can access the data, and which data is the most important to have access first, how people are going to get it, how quickly they need to access that data for you to continue working. And then the last couple of things are just when you're in that room and everyone started, ask the famous questions. I come from journalism background back in college, and the famous questions that you're supposed to ask in a journalist, everybody knows: who, what, why, where, when, and how. Just ask these questions about everything. Who needs to be informed? What do they need to be informed of? What needs to happen? Where are you going to work from if your office is not available? These kinds of questions. Just go through this, and like Todd said, ask the next question, which is what if? And this is part of your testing. Test your plan every year and just play out these scenarios. What if this happens? What do we do? If something else happens, what do we do? And then finally, James gave us a few frameworks that you can start with, and you can look these up and start with. And one of these, I didn't get the full name, so you'll have to pop in and add it in there, James. So one of them is the NSS, the National Standards Security. That'll be a good framework for you to start with. The National Association of Community Health Centers will have a really good one, especially for those people in healthcare. And then James, you mentioned one, CIS, but I wasn't quick enough to get the full name of that down when you said it.
Yeah, so NIST is the National Institute of Standards and Technology. That was the first one. I think you mentioned NISS, different one, yeah. NIST, NIST. And then the other one is called CIS, or Center for Internet Security. Those are more security centric when developing a BCP. But the other one that you mentioned was around a healthcare BCP, and it gives some different understanding, as you get into the biologicals and understanding how to plan out an emergency within a hospital is much different than a technology center, obviously. So always look at what framework fits for your industry for sure. But those are just some of them that I was able to easily pull up on the internet within a few seconds.
Yeah, thanks, James. And I think as Todd mentioned, if you can't find one for your industry, Todd mentioned when he started for JMark, he pulled the best things he found across multiple industries. And, anywhere you start is farther ahead than where you are right now.
Awesome. Thanks, Dax. Thanks, James. Thanks, Mark. And thanks, everybody who listened. And if you have any questions, head on over to jmark.com and send us a message, and we'll be happy to connect and have a wonderful year.
Thank you for attending this podcast. We hope it has been informative and helped convey that at JMark, we are people first and technology second. To learn more and discover additional content relevant to your business, please visit us online at jmark.com or at LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. You may also call us at 844-44-JMark. Thank you for your time, and we look forward to seeing you again.